Hi guys, welcome to homework helper number 2, the limits of science. This is a really important homework to review because you're going to see something like this on your first quiz of the year. So we're going to go through it together, and if you have any questions, be sure to stop by and ask me in person so we can make sure that you're well on your way to an A+ for your first quiz. Alright, let's read the directions. For the first part, it says to decide if the following can or cannot be studied by science. And again, the thing to remember is if you can use your five senses to either directly or indirectly perceive it, then it's definitely science, and if you can't use your five senses, then it's outside of the realm of science. So let's look at the first one, pregnancy. Obviously, pregnancy can be detected by more than one of the five senses, so I'm going to go ahead and put a check under it can be studied by science. Santa Claus. So Santa Claus is outside of the natural world, so we can't use our five senses to detect it, so that's going to be cannot be studied by science. Atoms. Atoms are the smallest unit of matter. These things can be seen, they can be felt, so we can use our five senses in order to directly perceive them, so that can be studied by science. Heart disease. Heart disease, again, you can see the heart, you can see when the heart is not functioning correctly, so it can be studied by science. Finally, the last one in this grouping is ethics, what is right or wrong. Now this is tricky. This concept of right versus wrong is outside of the scope of the five senses. So even though we talk about ethics and we talk about what's right and what is wrong in a science class, it cannot be studied by science. So we're going to put a check underneath cannot be studied by science. Now let's scroll down and look at our next set. For the next set it says, again, decide if the following are questions that can or cannot be answered by science. So again, we're thinking about our five senses. First one, which religion is best? Again, what's best? What is favorable? All of those things are outside of science because it's outside of our five senses, so it cannot be studied by science. What causes strep throat can absolutely be studied by science because we can use our five senses to determine, to take a culture and then to look at it underneath a microscope. Which type of music is the most beautiful? This concept of beauty is outside of our five senses, believe it or not. You can see something, but what qualifies it as being beautiful or not beautiful is outside of the scope of science. And then finally, what causes global warming? Obviously, warming trends can be studied. We can feel them, so it can be observed directly and indirectly using our five senses, so it can be answered by science. Let's look down at our next grouping. Decide if the following are explanations that can or cannot be used by science. And again, we're just thinking about our five senses. First one, plants make food using the sun's energy. That can be used by science because we can actually perceive that directly or indirectly using our five senses. Some people can predict the future because they have special abilities. Now think back to what we talked about in regards to the natural world versus the supernatural world. Being able to predict something is outside of the natural world, so it cannot be used by science. And then finally, AIDS is caused by a virus. That explanation can be used by science because we can physically see the virus that causes AIDS. And let's look at our last one. Decide if the following words describe what science is or what science is not. Testable. Testable is the same thing as an experiment. We can do an experiment, so obviously science is testable. Absolute means that it never changes, and we know that science changes all the time as we acquire new information, so science is not absolute. Disprovable means that it can be proven wrong, that it can change, and we know absolutely that science is disprovable because we need to be open to new information every time we do a new experiment. The next one, science is or is not based on experimentation. Obviously, experimentation is the same as testable, so yes, we're going to do a ton of experiments this year in class. And then lastly, science is or is not based on belief. This idea of belief is the same thing as faith, and we know that faith and belief are not based on evidence, and if it's outside of this concept of being based on evidence, we know that science is not based on belief. Alright, you guys, hopefully you did well on your homework, and if you have any questions, come and see me. If not, make sure you look over this again because you will be seeing all of these things on your first quiz for the year.